Hello there. Hello there, beautiful people. Today we get to talk about balancing act, the intersection of receiving, boundaries, and self care. Such an interesting topic, and it is absolutely the beginning of truly getting to live an extraordinary life is is learning how to balance and learning to believe that you are worthy and opening the doors for yourself for receiving, and understanding how receiving and boundaries and self-care all intertwine, intersect. Hi, Christina. It's great to see you here. Thank you for joining us today. I'm so excited about the topic that we have, um, because receiving, we're all taught, in which, so, good morning, Grace. Great to, or good afternoon, which, wherever you are today. Great to see you on this. So, we are often taught it is better to give than to receive, but you can't pour from an empty cup. And in all honesty, receiving from the universe, from God, whatever you call your higher power, is when you are receiving from people, you're also receiving from that universal love, that incredible power that's there. And oh, you live in California. Of course it's still morning. Great. That's fantastic. I love California, Grace. Um, so when we don't let other people help us or um, give us things, we're shutting out actually that's love that becomes, it grows. If we receive, we let people give to us, and we receive that in and we give back, and we develop relationships where it doesn't have to be perfect, right? It doesn't have to be perfect in terms of equal all the time, but over time the balance is there. They love you, you love them, you give and you receive, they give. The ripple effects of those relationships, community relationships, in groups that you belong to, whether they're, um, in any interest that you have, where you spend some time together, and that all of that ripple effect of that love is so much more. 2 plus 2 doesn't equal 4. It's like 16 or 20. It just keeps multiplying and rippling out. But the other thing that we don't realize that we do is we shut out God, the universe's love and care, whatever word that works for you there, um, with our own negative thoughts. We don't believe we're worthy, and we tell ourselves these things, and then the opportunity can be right in front of us, and we don't recognize it. The house I live in now, which I now own, when I was looking for a rental house, I looked at some houses that weren't that great, and one of them in particular, it was a beautiful home, but it had been a rental home and it was not clean and it needed work. And but they declined me because I had two big dogs. So when I came and saw this house, it was such a beautiful house, and it had windows, the layout was just like I wanted. I loved it. But I was telling myself these stories that I wasn't worthy, they wouldn't accept my dogs. I was in the financial situation that ultimately launched me into becoming successful and then doing this. But I was in that negative space, and so I didn't even call him back. I walked through this house, loved it, never made any effort. Totally told myself all these stories and walked away from it. And then they reached out to me. And when they reached out to me, I thought, oh, well, I wonder this is, if God is this is for me from the universe. And so then I reached back out, and then I ended up being able to rent it. And then I ended up later on, it turns out the landlord only owned this house, no other houses. I loved it. I loved the neighborhood. I was able to purchase this house from him. So not only was I meant to have this house, but clearly I was meant to have it for longer than even just finding a place to rent. But I almost missed it. I almost missed it because I made up a story, and that's what we do. We tell ourselves we're not worthy, or we don't have the credentials, or we can't do this yet, or it's going to be really hard to do. And the stories we tell ourselves are what, block us from receiving what we're supposed to be getting, what is being sent to us, what is right there waiting for us. Wow, this thank you, Grace. um it's It's crazy how often and there's so many opportunities that time I got lucky. I recognized it because something happened and then I got it. But how many times do we miss it completely because we don't even realize that we did that? Christina says, "What about if you have a hard time asking for help in general?" And that's part of that worthiness piece too. It's like you feel guilty if you need to ask. And so for me, the appreciation journal consistently every morning, which if anyone's on here or watching this who doesn't know about the appreciation journal, it's where you journal a few sentences every morning in um, what do I appreciate in others? That's one topic. And then what do I appreciate in life? And then what do I appreciate in myself? What do I appreciate in myself is one of the things that can start to change our our negative thought pathways. We'll start we every day we look for things to appreciate in ourselves. And the goal is if you do it consistently every morning, you'll start to appreciate things throughout the day. And it and when that happens, you start to hear, so to speak, become aware of the negative thoughts that you're having that you don't even recognize. They're so persistent and you've had them for so long, you don't even realize you're having them and that they're blocking your way to what you want. So, gaining perspective on having being able to ask for help, you're like one of the most, if I can say this, Christina, most giving people. Everyone feels comfortable to ask you for help and knows that you'll be there for them. So then it's cultivating relationships where that's a two-way street and getting comfortable in yourself and realizing that you're giving. I don't know, it helped me too sometimes to think I'm giving a gift to the giver. When I ask for help, they're excited to help me, they want to help me. I had to go through cancer to actually really get better at that. I would prefer that that was not the method that everybody chose. So, it's a matter of starting to realize how good you feel when you're giving and how good you feel when somebody asks you for help. Christina says, "Thank you. I have had a hard time balancing between helping everyone else and allowing," yes. Yes, but a balanced relationship is about that love flow that keeps us healthy. What happens when we're not willing to receive? We get drained, we get empty, we get exhausted, we get overwhelmed, right? But when we realize that the healthy thing and the balanced thing and the beautiful thing is giving the same gift to others by allowing them to give to you that you get from people. How good you feel when they ask you for help, but it's exhausting if you don't take it the other way. Yes, Victoria, receiving is part of giving. It's the part that makes that giant ripple effect and makes you feel good and makes you feel full. When you're in a conversation where there's a ton of give and take and it's this beautiful conversation, you can talk for hours and you're not exhausted. If you're in a conversation where you're doing most of the talking, or alternatively, if somebody is just dumping on you and just dumping and dumping, and especially not positive, it's just dumping, you're exhausted at the end of that conversation because it wasn't a two-way street. That giving and receiving is what helps that flow feel good. And that's true whether it's talking, whether it's interactions, whether it's friendship, all the different business, employees and relationships is like communication and interaction needs to be a two-way street. Then nobody feels empty and drained. And so learning those skills really is life changing in terms of how your life goes and how it feels. So that's a super, super important part of learning to receive. How does receiving have to do with self care? Because when we don't receive, we end up empty and drained. And so we're not letting in the love that's there that allows us to love ourselves more and have that reciprocal. So, receiving is a huge, important part of self care. And you have so much more to give, you have so much more patience when you receive. Like, for instance, if you have a consistent morning routine and you do it every morning before you encounter anybody, when you encounter somebody, child or spouse, or maybe you don't meet somebody till you get out and go to work, if they're not in a good space but you've done your work in the morning, you don't take it personally, so you have the ability to be more compassionate. So making yourself first is actually the biggest gift you can give to everyone around you. So that's another way to think about receiving. When you feel guilty about receiving, remember that you receiving is actually a gift that you're giving not only to the giver, but to everybody else around you. Because as you receive, you have more to give and you love to give. That's why sometimes you're not always good at receiving. So that's an important part of it too. And of course, that ties into self worth as well as self care, realizing you're worthy of receiving, but the universe is worthy of you allowing it to give to you so you have all of who you really are to give back. And how does this play into boundaries? Well, if we're not good at receiving, a lot of times what ends up happening with our boundaries is we feel like we have to make others happy for us to be happy. And in feeling that way, we lose track of where we are and where our boundaries are, and we get exhausted and we give and we give and we're not really getting back, and we're overwhelmed and we're struggling and we don't really know for sure what we want, because usually that's going in multiple different directions. When we get good at receiving as well as giving, our boundaries get clearer, right? Because if we're in a relationship and that person doesn't give ever, they're always taking, see, they're crossing our boundaries and they're taking advantage of us. When we're not good at receiving, we don't always recognize that. I know for years I lived in that space. I thought it was better to give than to receive, to the point that I had, more than one person, including a spouse and friends, that were mostly takers, that didn't give back because I didn't want to receive. I wasn't willing to receive. So that's what I attracted. And as I learned to receive and learned, giving and receiving, how that was so much more beautiful and felt so much better, and I had more to give, and the joy in the relationships was so much more, my boundaries were better. And I no longer had time for people who only needed to take everything they possibly could from me. It's like they're trying to plug into me as their God or source energy instead of plugging into God or source energy. And that's what we have to remember, is we need to plug ourselves in, but we cannot plug anybody else in. You cannot be source energy or the the answer for somebody else. Everyone has their own path. Everyone has their own lane. And so I can't travel somebody else's journey, nor can I tell them what their journey should be or who they are. We all tend to make that mistake from time to time. And certainly we've been raised, our society a lot is in that, where other people tell us who we are or who we should be, starting from when we're little kids. That's why we have lost our connection that gives us those clear boundaries and lets us easily give and receive and know where those lines are and not take things personally, because that's part of it too. We're receiving criticism. Listen, and no one else's opinion of you matters. Nobody's. The only opinion that matters of yourself is yours. And it takes a lot to learn that. You can respect people's opinions, you can appreciate people's opinions, but you can't own them. And you don't want to own them because they block your ability to figure out who you are. They make you confused about who you are if you look to other people to tell you who you are, or you need other people to be a certain way for you to be okay, or to tell you who you are. So I would like to know what questions you have around that, because this is a huge topic. And what is there certain areas of receiving that you feel like are more difficult than others? Receiving at work versus receiving at home. Is receiving from family harder than receiving from friends? I feel blessed that even during those times when I had the most unbalanced relationships, I still had some good ones. And I'm grateful for that. And the ones that were, both give and receive, there's still friends in my life 30 something years later, or more. So I just would like to know what you think about that. Christina says, is there something you suggest in general if you find it difficult to receive or accept help, love from people? Gosh, I think, and what's a good place to start to practice that? I certainly think appreciation is a big one, Because if you start saying to yourself all the time the things you appreciate about yourself, you just begin to open that door to feeling better about yourself, and feeling more worthy does allow you to open up to receiving more. Um, the reframe game can help, because a lot of the reason we don't feel good about receiving is actually that negative voice in our head. So if you started with appreciation and you're starting to recognize that negative voice, and then you start to play that, and if anybody wants any of these things, if you don't already have access to these, Grace, if you want the appreciation or the reframe game, we can absolutely drop the links in the comments. The 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 refrain game is, starting to be able to tell yourself, what, if you're like, I don't need help, I've got this. Then you say, well, what would it be like if I was able to accept help? What would it feel like if I was able to ask somebody for help, and then be excited about them helping me? How would that feel? That's a good place to start, to sort of start changing that narrative for yourself. What would it feel like if I was willing to let other people help me in, if I was able to ask for help doing say the house chores with your partner, or I was able to ask for help to create something that I need a little help creating? What would that feel like? What would it feel like? And how would the other person feel? How, would they feel as good about it as I feel? How do I feel when I ask for, or when someone asks me for help and I help them? Can I imagine that in another person, and how they would feel? And who do I want to feel that way? So who would I like to ask for help with something, because I want them to feel the way I feel? Maybe you can even start with, who would love for me to ask them that, and then they feel better. So the other thing, Christina, did that answer your question at all? Does that help? Because I'm willing to stay here as long as we need to come up with some ideas that really help you start to practice receiving. Um, what would it look like if something that I'm thinking is really hard came to me easily? What would it feel like if all of a sudden something showed up for you, that wasn't feeling very good, that you've been having some feelings, negative feelings around, and you're trying to change that? And you soften it into, what would it feel like if I just opened up my computer and this showed up? Awesome, Christina. And that's something you could even write it down and write for yourself. What would it feel like if somewhere where you could see it, and when your brain starts, because this is what I've learned, I want to change the tracks when it's happening. Like when I'm having those terrible feelings of, oh, this just not going to happen for me. There's nothing, there's nothing here. So I was like, what would it feel like if this showed up? What would it feel like? And it helps stop that pattern that just keeps going. So the other thing I wanted to mention to all of you guys, and for those of you watching the replay, we have a webinar coming up. We have an absolutely fantastic webinar coming up March 15th, called Create Your Own Luck. And it's how you take all of these different pieces of how to build an extraordinary life and create your own luck, so that you can have the extraordinary, fantastic life that you absolutely 100% deserve, that you're worthy of. But not only are you worthy of it, everyone around you, everyone who loves you, the community, the universe, because what you have to give back when you believe in your own worthiness, and you can create your own luck, is absolutely magical. And you guys are absolutely worthy of it. So I cannot wait for you to, and we're going to provide a link, so you can click on the link and sign up for the webinar if you like. It is actually scheduled at 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, March 15th, Friday, March 15th, in honor of St. Patrick's Day. So we can't wait to have you join us for that. And I hope you guys have a fantastic rest of your day and a fantastic week. Thank you so much for joining us today, and have a wonderful rest of your week.